Hello and welcome to a new episode of Josh's Car Corner. This episode is going to cover everything that's been done to the GTO since the last winter upgrades episode and how everything has gone. As you can see, the car is back together. It's been back together for about a month, and I've just been dialing things in and getting things tuned. Had to retune the engine, obviously. It's got a lot more air flowing through it now. Had to make some adjustments here and there and get the car ready to go around Road America, which I just did this past Sunday, where the car did amazingly well. But I'll talk about that later. Now, if you remember from the winter upgrades episode, I ended up doing a lot of work to the engine. Basically took it all the way down to a rotating assembly. So all that was left was the crankshaft and the pistons, and built it back up from there, improving things and making things better where I could. I ended up going to an engine shop that's right here in my hometown called Advanced Engine Concepts. Now, these guys do $20,000 plus high performance race engines and GT engines, engines for drag boats. One of the guys that works there used to build engines for NASCAR teams down in the Carolinas. I was able to go in there and ask them questions, and they were very curious about what I was doing, and they helped me out a lot, and I really appreciate them for that. So I have to give a shout out to Advanced Engine Concepts, because they didn't have to help me. They didn't have to give me any of the advice they did, because they've got much bigger projects that they work on, but they were very nice and helpful, and they helped me out a lot. They helped me get AARP rod bolts in the engine. From the research I did, that is one of the weak links in the LS driveline, is the rod bolts for the connecting rods. So I took the rotating assembly over to their shop. We took the pistons and the connecting rods out. I put the rods together. We took a tool and we marked all the cylinders so they're all in order and the caps are all in order, and if we ever have to take the engine apart again, everything is already marked. And they re-honed and resized, made sure all the pistons, the journals were perfectly round. And then I put everything back together, and then from there I started building the engine back up. We did a trick to the oil pump so it would make more pressure, especially at high RPM. Because of the setup I was going to be running, it was important to have good oil pressure at high RPM. The heads ended up getting ported. They have a guy who does head porting for them, and they used to do a lot of LS engines, and they have a guy that does all their LS engine porting for head work. And he had the heads, and in a couple of weeks he ported them out and did a nice angle job on the intake and exhaust valves, and really smoothed it out, made them really nice. I ended up ordering parts to rebuild the valve train. I ended up going with Pax springs. They're a Beehive single spring, but they're from their RPM series. They're the 1219X springs, and they're just about the best Beehive spring there is on the market. But what's really important is they have a very good base frequency, so they don't develop harmonics at high RPMs. And harmonics, when you're turning really high revs, are important to make sure you don't get those in the valve train, because they can cause all kinds of instabilities. So those got put in. I just reused the factory seats and retainers. They were fine. I did end up getting for the rockers the Comp Cam's trunnion upgrade, which basically just replaces the bearing and the sleeve that goes in the rocker that the rocker pivots back and forth on, with a much better needle bearing setup than the factory setup. The factory setup, the bearings can eventually basically just fall out of the thing, and then your rocker just disintegrates, and then little needle bearings get in the engine and cause problems. So I didn't want to worry about that when I'm turning high rev, so I just went ahead and did that. The push rods I ended up getting replaced too. I ended up going to Manson to get custom push rods. They do push rods that are about the thickest diameter you can get inside an LS cylinder head without having to bore the head out. It's 11/32 diameter with a very thick wall. It's a 120 wall. And I got them just the right length for the preload I needed for the new LS7 lifters that I put into the engine. You have to be sure your preload is just right. The GM actually says the preload for the lifters is 82 thousandths, and it's a very minute number, and most push rods only come in lengths of 25 thousandths difference, and nothing that was available would fit just perfectly with the preload I needed. So I went to them, and they can do custom lengths down to 5 thousandths of an inch. And because they're so thick, they're also 50% stronger, and they have smaller oil passages too, so you keep more oil in the lifters where you want them when you're turning high revs. So the valve train is just absolutely topped in, dialed in, good quality parts in there. Don't have to worry about valve float or lifters collapsing or lifters not being able to pump up. That's all good. The intake was already ported from a couple of years ago. I just had a factory LS2 throttle body, and I had it replaced with a ported throttle body that's a CNC porting, and they do a custom job on it where they actually cut a bit of a rifling pattern into the throttle body very, very finely. You can barely feel it with your finger, but it does open up the throttle body too, and it does make a difference. And I can see it in the tuning just how much more air the engine is flowing. And with the head porting, I thought it was necessary to just get as much air into the engine as possible. I also did decide to do a camshaft. I know in the winter upgrades episode I was going back and forth on that. Do I do one? Do I not do one? Well, I did. Enough people talked me into finally just getting a cam, and I did get a very small cam from Comp. It's a custom profile that I came up with myself. You can get things from other companies that are very, very similar, but not quite. The profile for the duration is pretty common, 220, 224, but I'm using Comp's RPM high lift profile lobes, and most guys go with a much bigger lift lobe than what I went with. I went with a smaller lift lobe because I knew I was going to be spinning the engine, and I didn't want to be putting undue stress on the valve train. And the nice thing is the lift I went with, at some point, if I feel like it, I could change to 1.8 rockers and basically get the same lift as an LS7 motor. It'd be about 590, 591. Right now it's 563, 568. Perfectly suited to the job I want, because I still wanted to have very good street manners. I wanted to still get good mileage, but I wanted to have good power. And from the tuning I've done, I can tell it's making a ton of power more. And the torque and the horsepower peaks have moved up in the range. My peak torque is now at 5,200 RPM. Before it was at about 4,800 RPM. And my peak horsepower was at 5,800, so I can only imagine it's somewhere around 6,200 right now too. So I can't wait to get this thing on the dyno and see how much horsepower it's actually producing. But if I was going to make a conservative estimate, I would say I gained about 40 rear wheel horsepower. You can just feel it everywhere, and it pulls so hard now, it's ridiculous. The footage you'll see later from Road America will show just how fast it was pulling all the way up to my new red line, which I set at 6,900. And I'm shifting now at about 6,800, and it just doesn't stop accelerating. It just keeps making more and more and more power. So it's really incredible. The other thing I did when I had the engine out was I painted the engine. I put it back together and painted the whole thing. I cleaned it off really good. All the parts I could, I ran through a parts washer. I gunked the block and whatever else I had to. I put 2 coats of primer on it and 2 coats of paint, and it just came out awesome. And the color I chose was Pontiac Metallic Blue, which is a classic 60s Pontiac color, and just pays a little homage to the GTOs of 50 years ago, because this year is the 50-year anniversary of the GTO. And I just thought it was a nice thing to do to pay homage to the original. So the engine, if you'll remember from previous videos, went from looking like this to now looking like this. And I replaced the factory valve covers because I didn't like the metal brackets, and I didn't like how that looked. It was very messy, and they actually add a couple of pounds of weight to the whole engine. So these valve covers that I have on there now are from Holley, and I just painted them like I painted the rest of the engine, but they allow you to mount the ignition coils directly to them and cover up the bolts that hold the valve covers in place. And it's just a much cleaner and nicer installation, and I really like how it all turned out. And I've gotten a lot of compliments so far from everyone who's seen the engine, and I think it just looks great. I cleaned up the accessories as best I could. I painted what parts I could to make everything look nice, and I'm very, very happy with how it all turned out. And after a weekend at Road America, as hot as the engine would get, the paint isn't fading or peeling or distorting in any way. It's staying the Pontiac Blue that I started with. So it looks like it's going to hold up for a very long time and look this pretty for a very long time, and I'm very happy about that. I made a list of everything I did over the winter and how much it cost me. See, here's something that goes with doing custom work on cars. Over the fall, I originally had set myself a budget of about $2,000 to do all this work. So I kept a list of everything that I did, including the prices of everything. For the engine work and all the other drivetrain parts, I ended up spending about $3,600. Not quite within the budget. It was about double the budget. But those are the kind of things you run into when you're doing custom work and you get into doing things and then you realize you should do this and you didn't budget for this, but you really need to do this. One of the things that happened after I got the engine back together is I found out when I was tuning that my fuel injectors just weren't flowing enough air anymore, or enough fuel anymore, to keep up, and they were almost getting to their absolute maximum cycle where they just couldn't put any more fuel into the engine. So I had to upgrade to fast 46-pound injectors and say goodbye to the factory 32-pound injectors. Now I've got all the fuel that I need to keep the engine right where I want it for air-fuel ratio on the top end, and it pulls very, very nicely. I also got a polyurethane insert for my transmission mount. I was getting very annoyed because just driving down the road, my shifter would be bouncing up and down and back and forth because mine was so wore out. So I got a brand new engine mount, which actually took a month to get from GM. I'm surprised on that. But then I put the the poly insert in there, and now my shifter doesn't move at all. There is a little more NVH coming through the shifter in the center console, but it was totally worth it. The car is so much faster now, and it's so much more balanced and responsive. The power is just from 3,000 to 6,800. It is just power, power, power everywhere. It hasn't lost any of its low-end grunt for cruising around on the freeway in 6th gear or at highway speeds. If I don't need to go to third to ever pass anybody for any reason, fourth is more than enough. It's just incredible, the power. It handles really well. And at Road America, my top speeds on the front straightaway in all previous years were about 140, 141 miles an hour. This year on my fast lap that I ran, I hit 148. But that was just unbelievable. And the car was so much faster that my braking distances had to be so much longer that I spent more time braking than I have any other year. But I also ran 3 seconds faster than I did last year with the same tires and the same brakes. Next year, I need to definitely get bigger brakes and much better wheels and tires to go out there and really attack that track, because with the power I've got now, if I can get the right wheels and tires on this car, there's no reason it couldn't go out there and run a 2-minute 40-second lap. I ran 2:51, and I'm very happy with that. But I know this car has got a lot more in it, and if I have the confidence to really dive deep into the corners with braking and really attack the corners with good traction, this thing is going to be a wicked, wicked track monster. It'll be a lot of fun. So what I'll show you now is some of the footage from Road America, and I shot a lot of it, and there was some really cool stuff. I had a couple of people ride with me. A guy named Terry Stasko, who follows me on YouTube, and I hope I've inspired you to do some things to your car. And also a cousin of mine came out and rode with me for a session, and he had a lot of fun, and now he's inspired. He's got the bug. He wants to come out and do track days as well. And of course my buddy Joe was there again, and he was driving his G8, and he had a lot of fun. He took a guy around in his L1 Camaro, and we were both getting compliments all day for just how fast our cars were, and that was a lot of fun. So I'll show you some footage of that. The next thing you'll see probably from me is I've got a lot of things going on this summer with the GTO. In June, a friend and I are going to do the last 3 legs of the Hot Rod Power Tour this year. We're going to start in Crown Point, Indiana, and then go with them from there to the Quad Cities, and it ends in Wisconsin Dells, which is just about an hour from my house. And then in July, my buddy Joe with the G8, he and I are going to go to Michigan and do this thing called the Michigan Mile. It's basically a 1-mile shootout on a runway, and it's just how fast can you go in your car. So we're going to do that and see just how fast our cars can go. And with the power I'm putting down now, I would be shocked if this thing didn't get somewhere around 165 miles an hour. It is so fast on the top end, and it gets even faster with the Veraram. And the scoops opened up, and the scoops feeding air into the Veraram, it just makes more and more power the faster it goes. If you have any questions about what I did, please ask in the comments section and I'll answer as best I can. I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and I am really getting excited to be driving the car this year. I think I'm going to have an absolute ball with it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I will keep you guys updated as the summer goes along. So until then, this is me signing off. It's freaking cold out here, even though it's May, and we'll see you later.
Thanks a lot, man. That was awesome.
No problem.
That was real good. Now my to-do list for my GTO just tripled.
Yeah.